Welcome back. Well, if you're a former COVID patient, you likely never received any follow-ups after you were released from the hospital, especially if you're Black. Now, a University of Michigan study says Black COVID patients are less likely to receive the follow-ups and more likely to experience longer waits before they can return to work. So let's tell you a little bit about that study. More than 2,000 COVID patients in Michigan were surveyed after spending 60 days in the hospital. The survey's results determined more than 50% of patients of color were readmitted to the hospital within 2 months after being released. It also shows that Black COVID patients have experienced challenges returning to their jobs after recovering from COVID. The survey says it took Black patients about 35.5 days to return to the workplace, which is longer than any other racial group. Angela Reddock-Wright, employment attorney and mediator, is with us now to talk about this. Angela follows all of the workplace and human rights trends. Angela, thank you so much for being with us here tonight. Welcome to BNC.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. It's a very important topic to talk about. So, Angela, you actually just heard the numbers. First, your reaction to the survey results showing it takes more than half a month longer than other races to return to work. What do you think about that?
Well, one, I'm glad that they are doing a survey that really focuses on Blacks and people of color, because we know of all the communities and individuals impacted by this COVID-19 pandemic across the board, both in terms of health, physical health issues, emotional issues, mental issues, and economically, that the Black community and people of color have been impacted the most, and women also. So I'm great to see that some studies are being done on it and that we're actually tracking this. And so it's not surprising, but I'm glad that we're bringing it to the forefront.
And so, Angela, on top of that, the survey actually found that Black adults were also less likely to be offered workplace accommodations. Why is that, and what types of accommodations do you think are needed?
Well, it's really a function of the law and how the law is written. So, in most, and at the federal level, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, and most states have something equivalent to the Americans with Disabilities Act, which says that if an individual is out with a disability, and when we think disability, we think of kind of known physical disabilities that we
Right.
traditionally associate with people. So, COVID has not traditionally fallen under what constitutes a traditional disability. So it first becomes an issue of how the law defines a disability. And because COVID hasn't been considered a disability, it's made it difficult for people to access the rights that you might normally have when you have a disability or when you're out ill, because the law requires that an individual with a disability, that the employer has a duty to reasonably accommodate that employee and to engage that employee in what we call the interactive process. So if an employer does not consider COVID a disability, then they're not going to go through with all of those normal processes that they're required to do under federal or state law. They're going to say, well, once you've exhausted your traditional medical leave, which may be 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, maybe generous employers give, some additional time. Once you've exhausted that, then unless you come back to work, you're considered a no call, no show. So we've needed some changes in the law to accommodate what we're calling the long haulers and even the short haulers, because even the short haulers could experience COVID for 7, 14, 21 days. But for sure, we need the laws to be updated and to change to accommodate the long haulers.
Have you seen any companies making that adjustment just yet?
Yes, for sure. Companies and also steps are being taken at the federal level, where recently the Department of Justice has issued guidance and recommendations suggesting that the Americans with Disabilities Act be expanded to include conditions of COVID as a disability. So there are companies that will have to comply with that new law and those new recommendations. And then there are companies who are just doing it on their own simply because it's the right thing to do. And they know that the issues that we face with COVID are new, they're fresh, they're not something that we've experienced in the 21st century work environment. So many companies are taking stock of their policies and their practices and trying to look at ways to accommodate and to expand their policies to accommodate the COVID-19 condition and pandemic.
Yeah, and I mean, Angela, we know it's so important. I was one of those people who had COVID back in December, and I remember returning back to work and just trying to feel comfortable again. And obviously, you see me, I'm speaking for a living. So just the difference in like breathing differently and just kind of the
Yes.
constant clearing of your throat, like there's a whole adjustment. And then also fatigue.
Yes, yes.
Hmm.
And all of that has to be taken into account. And those conditions that you just described, if you read the new federal laws around including COVID as a disability, those are exactly the types of conditions the law speaks to: fatigue, lung problems, heart problems, breathing issues.
Hmm.
So I think it's great that our federal government is acknowledging that this is a new condition, that is one that will probably be with us for some time. I'm not sure COVID will ever go away.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we won't see it in the way that we have been seeing it in this last 18 or 19 months, but that it's never going to go away. And there will be individuals who, once contracting it, will have a very difficult time because of underlying medical conditions and other
Right.
issues. It'll take them a while to get better. And so it's good to see that the law and ultimately most workplaces should be moving into a place where they're prepared to accommodate the long haulers and even the short haulers with COVID.
For sure. And another one too is the memory fog or the brain fog.
Yes,
Yeah, that's
yes.
another one. So, and Angela, the study also shows that Black patients also receive less medical follow-ups from their doctors. Now, while you can't actually specifically speak to that, what about human resources? How should they best follow up with employees upon their return?
Well, certainly, I mean, human resources has a dual role. One, to be there for employees and to support employees with medical issues and other issues, but also to ensure that they are evenly and equally exercising the company's policies and their practices. So when someone comes to work, it's definitely appropriate for human resources to ask for some type of clearance for that person to return to work. And if the return to work note says that this employee has an illness or disability that needs to be accommodated, then it's the responsibility of human resources to make sure that the company follows that guidance, and that it then begins to engage the employee in what we call the interactive process, which means not necessarily delving into that
Hmm.
employee's medical condition, because we still have our rights to privacy, but looking into, if the doctor's note says, for example, that you need more breaks than normal, or you need to be in a separate area, or you need to work part of the time from home and part of the time from work, then human resources has to take those recommendations from the doctor very seriously and see how they can accommodate or seek to accommodate that employee. So
Hmm.
human resources is the front line of making sure that the law is complied with, that the company's policies and its practices are equally and equitably followed, and that they do look at each employee as an individual, and really, where they can, try to accommodate that employee and not discriminate against that employee or be retaliatory towards that employee because they suffered from this unfortunate condition that we call COVID, or any other medical condition.
Certainly. Yeah, you gave some really, really good advice. So hopefully the employers are listening. Angela, thank you so much because again, that was all great information. We appreciate your time. And stay with us, much more BNC Live coming up after a short break.